Welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I'm your host, Rob, joined by producer JL, John-Luc Shapiro, and recording a day early because how could we not get an instant reaction pod out to the monumental, earth-shattering, emotional news of the expected but still quite shocking Artemi Panarin trade. Artemi Panarin now a member of the Los Angeles Kings. The Rangers get this done before the Olympic roster freeze, but certainly a lot of things to sort through when you look at the overall context, the return that the Rangers got, and just, you know, we'll cover all that plus the overall emotions of this fan base, which are very raw, rightfully so, and very negative at the moment. JL, how are you?
I mean, could be worse, honestly.
It's just sports.
Yeah, I mean, perfectly. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean by that. It could be worse, you know. I mean, you could be, fan of a bad hockey team. Oh, wait, we are fans of a bad hockey team. Oh man, I don't know. It's it's just it's just hard to kind of rationalize a lot of this, but yeah.
Well, we will try to do that. So let's first go over the terms of the trade. So the Rangers trade Artemi Panarin to the Los Angeles Kings, one of the teams that we thought was in the mix for sure. It wasn't necessarily like a surprise that that's where he ended up. I think the big surprise ended up being the return, or, you know, lack thereof, that the Rangers got back, right? So the return as it stands now is a conditional third round draft pick in this year's the 2026 draft, and prospect Liam Greentree. Now, let's be fair to Greentree. I don't think this is an exciting name by any means, especially when you looked at some of the other, potential possibilities around the league. And you look at things like the Brock Nelson trade, and that he netted Cal Ritchie and a first round pick, of course. You try to go through those trade comps, right? We've been doing that with Dave for the last few weeks, after the letter. Greentree is the Kings' best prospect. He checks a lot of Chris Drury boxes as well in terms of his size, in terms of his sort of leader. He's a leadership type guy. He's the captain of his current OHL team, the Windsor Spitfires. So very much a Drury guy, for better or worse. Now there's only one other piece of this trade. I guess the Rangers would get an additional fourth round pick if the Kings advance 2 playoff rounds. So, and I believe the conditions on the original third round pick are that it becomes a second if they win 1 playoff round. So there is some draft capital here. There is a prospect here, but JL, I mean, and I'll let you go first. This certainly feels like a very underwhelming return for a guy that was the best Ranger free agent signing ever, and a guy who is still an elite NHL point producer and forward. So what were your initial thoughts when you saw the news?
Oh man, I'm still trying to process it, but I was shocked. Um, I didn't think it was going to be LA. I knew it was that was one of the teams that were mentioned. Um, I thought it would have been more. Nothing against Greentree. I mean, he for all intents and purposes, outside of you know, the skating, which seems to be some kind of a common theme. He is a decent prospect, but I just wish they had gotten more, at least a guaranteed first or second, and then you look at the whole thing where they end up signing him to an extension, which kind of makes me think, well, why couldn't they just get more from that? The fact that they signed him to an incredibly team friendly deal, mind you, which
Yeah.
kind of make this the thing that frustrates me, and I haven't really had a chance to kind of process this fully yet. I'm trying to make sure that I am not happy with the return, but I'm also trying to rationalize this as well, so I'm not losing my mind just in constant negativity. But you couldn't get like an Alex Laferriere or somebody that you can slot on this team right away.
Turcotte's kind of a guy who's become a little kind of falling out of favor there. He's just kind of
Yeah,
hasn't panned out, right? He's one of those guys who hasn't panned out. But
right. Yeah, you get Alex Turcotte, you get somebody that you can say, hey, you know what, this is a project. The Bruins got more for an older Brad Marchand. You know,
yes,
I don't understand why, and then why we just gave him away. And then to make matters worse, it's the fact that, we made all this hubbub. Look, we can talk about the off ice stuff all we want, and that obviously ends up really playing a factor with a lot of this. But two years, is it 2 years, $11 million?
yep,
Telling me that we couldn't do that? I
yeah,
I understand that there was this sort of onus to want to get younger and faster, fine. But early in the offseason, the point was made, or early in the season when things really started to unravel, was the fact that Panarin wanted term. But not only did he want term, but he wanted big money. Okay.
right,
So
right.
how is it that you got bamboozled not only by the Kings, but you got bamboozled by your own player because now he goes to LA after everything gets shipped over, and then he signs a team friendly deal. At this point, with the lackluster return and the fact that they're quote unquote retooling, you might as well just kept them for that price point because it
100%.
gives you the option to be flexible in the off season, once the cap goes up. Because now you're essentially saving about a good, $5-6 million on that alone, and you can still find a way to maneuver that cap to get somebody to fill, another part of the team. So I don't understand what's going on here. Look, everyone knows that, at least if you're a listener of this podcast, you know that I try to rationalize this thing as much as possible. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what management has done, but there's always a side to, okay, this is why I think they did it. This is why I think that they did it, this, that, and the fourth. And it helps you deal with it. But I legitimately have no idea what's happening. And I feel as if Drury and Sullivan really need to find somebody to replace that because things are not looking great and things are going downhill really fast. I don't know what else or how else I can rationalize this without thinking the tank is going to blow up in our faces.
Yeah. So two things, right? First, from an emotional perspective, it's about as angry, frustrated, upset as I've been at any single transaction I can remember in my life. I mean, I cried when the Rangers originally traded Mark Messier. Um, Probably shouldn't have in hindsight because Mark Messier Part 2 was certainly nothing to write home about. Um, but it also just had this incredible sort of like doom and gloom aura to it, right? So not just the frustration you feel as a fan because the return is underwhelming, but it feels very much like a point of no return where I'm looking at the overall picture now, and I don't see how this gets better for a very long time. So I am as angry and as frustrated as I've ever been with any of the sports teams I root for about a single transaction they've ever made. I think it is in the running for the single worst trade that the Rangers have ever made. Um, and you know what? Look, I know some people are trying to sort of throw well, they didn't really have any leverage. That is a position that they put themselves in. So let's
Mm-hmm.
now step back and give this the wider context that it needs. The Rangers thought going into this season that they were a playoff caliber team. Those are Chris Drury's own words. Um, I think, and this is me being optimistic, that the first 20 games showed you that, yeah, they probably could have been in the mix. They were a little bit unlucky in terms of, shots not going in the net when they were creating a ton of offense. And this was in the midst of a slow start by Panarin as well, by the way. But they had some nice moments. They were a pretty good 5-on-5 team. They were defending. They always will have the goaltending, all those things that we know about the Rangers. This season got derailed by injury in part, but also because I think it did become apparent that even if they were a playoff caliber team, you were talking bottom 2 or 3 playoff spots and not a real serious contender where all of the key players were not in the right, not the right age. Right. So it's clear that they needed to turn this thing over. And I think that's fine. And I think that if the injuries accelerated that and they decided to just punt this season, it was totally fine to look into trading Panarin, Trocheck, Braden Schneider, Sam Carrick, Carson Soucy, right? All those guys, maybe Lafreniere on the right deal, whatever. The mistake they made, of course, was the letter. And I think at the time, and I know you and Dave did a reaction pod, JL. I think at the time, my thought was, well, they did this before. I think the fans do appreciate some level of transparency. And I kind of just was like, oh, it's like kind of a little melodramatic, but whatever. And I think looking back on it now, that was basically the death knell for this version of the Rangers and Chris Drury, because what he did was he gave up all of his leverage, not only with teams who he's trying to negotiate trades with, but also with his own internal players. And so what he could have done with Panarin, he could have said, hey, listen, it's up to you. We would love to have you back, but we do need to retool this thing. We are going to look at trading some guys, key guys, right? Guys that are movable. And you don't need to say names, right? But that means, you know, he would have hopefully inferred that means Trocheck, that means Laugh, that means Schneider, whatever. But if the market doesn't materialize a certain way and you want to stay, like, let's continue those extension talks. And also, let's see how the market develops coming up to the Olympic roster freeze, coming up to the actual trade deadline. They didn't do that. And they basically went to Panarin and said, we're trading you. So, and they thought they were doing the right thing, right? They thought they were doing two things there. They thought they were doing right by their player, which in part they were, right? They were letting him control his own destiny. Fine. They also thought they would create a bidding war. And the opposite turned out to be true, where knowing Panarin could nuke any deal sort of put them in this position where they had to say yes to whoever was ultimately going to be his final suitor. The thing that doesn't add up to me, JL, is the fact that he settles on a 2-year, $11 million extension. That is truly blowing my mind right now, because of course the Rangers would have done that. Like, of course they would have. That might have been the first offer they made him in fucking September, by the way, when they tried to do extension talks. They might have said, would you be open to a short-term deal around your same current AAV, right? We could do 2 years, $23 million, right? 11 and a half a year. And his agent probably laughed them out of the room. So, look, the landscape changed because the Rangers made it change. And they put themselves in an awful position. And now, like I said, JL, like, maybe this is just emotion talking, and in a few weeks they will swing a decent Trocheck trade. They will flip Braden Schneider for a helpful piece. They will have cap space, and maybe they can make that work with something in free agency that is exciting and improves the team. But I feel like we are a long, long way from this team being good again, because I just don't see where the talent's coming from.
Well, I was thinking about that too, about the contract extension. Honestly, I don't think he wanted to be here. And honestly, good credit to him.
I think he did want to be here. No, and I don't mean to cut you off. I think he did want to be here in September, but he doesn't want to be here now.
Right.
And that is kind of the point of, again, the letter not only fucks you with the rest of the GMs in the league because they smell blood in the water and they know you're motivated. You can't play coy. It also screws you over with your own guys. And I know the players, they whined and complained and moaned about lack of communication from management last year. So Drury overcorrected in this instance. Look, I mean, ultimately you have to be upfront with these guys, but you don't need to share every bit of your plan with them. And I feel like that really put him at a disadvantage. So anyway, sorry to cut you off. You continue.
No, right. No, you're good. No, it's just, I think, like you said, after a bit, he didn't want to be here with the way things were turning out, especially with the letter. I think he got played, Drury. I think his agent, Panarin's agent, played him. It's just, I'm just having trouble understanding why did it need to be done now is another thing I'm thinking of. Why did the deal have to get
that's a great point.
I don't understand the rush. I think they also put themselves in a corner there as well when they've said, "Oh, we need to get this done now." No, you didn't.
No.
If the return was that light in terms of negotiations on what they wanted, you might as well have just waited till after the freeze to push pressure onto other teams to potentially come and swoop in and make a better deal. I don't understand why Drury was so insistent on getting rid of him so quick over the turn being so small. And then to get slapped in the face by having him sign an extension that's a team friendly deal. I genuinely really just don't understand why, you know. And like I said, at this point, you might as well have just kept him because at least then, if he continues to play well with the Rangers, which he had been over the last couple of weeks,
He's been great the last 3 months.
right? Yeah. So you, why not? Why not see how much more you can get out of him? But no. And I'm just trying to figure out what is exactly going through Chris Drury's head. Look, speaking in terms of on ice stuff only, Artemi Panarin was probably the greatest free agent signing this team has ever had.
Yeah, but by far.
By far. Just from regular season contributions alone. And look, people say he didn't do well during the playoffs, but I'm almost positive in that he probably had some of the best moments in Rangers playoff history. So let's not try to denigrate too much in terms of that.
He wasn't the only one also that struggled during those
Right,
games.
right,
If it was one guy and it was him, it's there's a lot more context that's needed there. And
yeah,
to
yeah,
your point, Jay, look, he's got a Game 7 OT winner. He's got a huge OT winner in the Carolina series. He came up with plenty of big moments throughout his play. I'm not going to nitpick on a playoff career.
no,
The guy is the franchise leader in points per game. That's all you need to know. And I know the
right,
Rangers are not, littered. Their history is not littered with high scorers, but that's still a very significant illustrator of how great he was.
right. And then all you get is a a I guess the reasoning behind that is that Green Tree was a first round pick, so I
Yes.
guess maybe that substitute as a first round pick. But I mean, they put themselves in a corner, and it doesn't really give me too much confidence on potentially what a Trocheck or a Schneider deal or a potential Lafreniere deal can look like. Because ideally, what you could have gotten for Panarin is someone that could fill a roster spot right away,
Yeah.
and that you can kind of just have this young player or this certain player fill the spot, and then you have whoever else you have coming in for Trocheck. That honestly, that's even at this point they even trade him, which I think is going to be another gap. As much as I personally like Trocheck, I don't think they're going to trade him. And then Schneider is probably going to get dealt for peanuts, for peanuts on the dollar as well. So, or pennies on the dollar rather. So,
Yeah. I mean, look, it also, I think to your point, this speaks to the lack of a plan and the lack of an overall vision for what Chris Drury wants this hockey team to be. I mean, I think for the last 15 months, he sort of understood the macro issues, right? And he's like, well, we need to get younger and faster. Our core wasn't cut out to beat Florida, and they needed to sort of, address that. And I think that was fine at a macro level, but he had no idea how to even begin the process of developing what was a very good team into a true contender that could beat Florida in a playoff series, that could beat, whether it's Colorado, Dallas, Edmonton, whoever it might have been in the West. Like, but they were not far away.
no,
And he's completely bungled that. And now, and again, so he gets in front of the media. I did not read his full remarks. I haven't seen any video. The Rangers don't usually release video of these types of press conferences. He was basically asked if there is any timeline. And he said, no, I'm not going to put a timeline on it. And he also even, it basically the overarching, sort of theme of these quotes of these statements was like, well, yeah, it's a retool, but like it doesn't have a timeline. And I think, plenty of people on in our public spaces on the internet and social media were saying, well, if it's a retool without a timeline, it's just a rebuild then. Like,
yeah,
and again, so what is the plan here? There's no plan here. And that
Yeah.
is the constant theme. And Dave has been saying it for multiple years. And we've been sort of harping on it as, the Rangers are trying to address their issues and build a contender here. There just is no unified plan. There's nothing identifiable where you can say like, oh, that's what they're trying to do. It's all been short-term fixes, throwing shit against the wall. And now like, well, I know I need to like basically rebuild this team, but I'm not going to call it a rebuild because that's going to scare everybody. And we don't want everybody to jump ship, fans, ownership, etc. So we're going to call it a retool. But like, if you are retooling, this is not the fucking trade you make. That's my thing, is that this trade gets you a guy that might be in the NHL in 2 years. He has not played pro hockey yet. He's still in fucking junior hockey, Greentree. He has not signed his first pro contract yet. He will probably play a handful of games for Hartford this spring. A second or third round pick, and it may be a fourth round pick. Those are lottery tickets with very low odds of succeeding. And the guy you draft this June is not going to be ready to play in the NHL for 3 or 4 years. So how is this a retool? Because a retool, you're supposed to bring in NHL ready young players, and you're supposed to be targeting distressed assets. I talked about this at length with Dave last week on the pod. You have to do it the way the Washington Capitals did it. And the Washington Capitals, if they had this asset to trade, this would not have been the deal they would have made, right? And oh, by the way, like they held on to John Carlson and Alex Ovechkin because the whole point was to try and turn the thing around quickly. So if you're trying to turn it around quickly, don't trade Artemi Panarin. Try to work out a short to medium term extension. So clearly you can tell how frustrated I am here, and we should get to the questions in a bit. But any final emotional thoughts from you, JL?
I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated because pretty much a lot of the points that you said, I agree with. I try to do my best to look at the lighter side of things, as I said, and I just don't know how I can look at the brighter side of this. You talk about Drury not having a plan. Well, it kind of became evident when he ended up trading, and I hate to have to rehash this, but it comes back to light again. When they wanted to trade for essentially try to get Jack Eichel, but they come to find out Buffalo doesn't want to trade with the Rangers, and they trade Buchnevich, but then you didn't have anything to sort of supplement that. What do you do to replace that? And even to this day, they're still looking to try and find a spot. I mean, maybe Gabe Perreault is finally the one that ends up filling that spot at the end of the day. But, as it's gone along and options have waned, because now McDavid's going to be off the market for another 2 years. Eichel is off the market. The only one that's really plausible in terms of the Rangers right now is Jason Robertson, but who knows if they can even get that type of deal done.
They don't have the assets to make that deal now. And that was the other frustration here, is that if you are stockpiling first round picks, young talent, et cetera, that puts you in a better position to potentially make a Jason Robertson deal. And they're no closer to doing that with this trade. No, it's frustrating. And I don't know how they recover from that. I don't want to sound that dramatic, but once the letter came out and once it was apparent the direction that this thing was headed, you knew they were going to trade Panarin. And I'm sure most fans were like, all right, well, he's the best player on the market. Brock Nelson just got a first round pick in Cal Ritchie. Brad Marchand got multiple second round picks. A few years ago, Claude Giroux, same thing, long-time Flyer, end of his deal, had a full no move clause, all that stuff. Got Owen Tippett and like a first-round pick and multiple pieces. Like, this is a disaster. There is no other way to put it. This is a disaster.
Yeah.
They had to nail this trade. They didn't nail this trade, and they are worse today with no long-term prospects. Like, it is bleak, and this guy has to make major moves in the next 6 months, or else he should be looking for a job, because there's just no way you can continue to trust him to run the franchise. So I've said my piece. I'm happy to go to the questions. I'm sure they're all going to be Panarin stuff anyway, although I'm not sure how much more we can say, but we'll try.
Right. Yeah, definitely don't disagree with your statements. But all right, let's go to the questions. We got some blue sky here, so I'm going to start with that. This first question comes from the Gerard Glenn slander account at allentanderson.bsky.social. He says, F it, let's go there. Is this trade worse than Buchnevich? Yes.
Yes, 100% yes.
Yes.
Again, you could at least, and look, I was willing, and I know you were too, JL. I was willing to squint hard to see the logic behind the Buchnevich trade. I was willing to squint hard to see the logic behind the Barkley Goodrow contract. And you could argue that that stuff worked short term. The team was good.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it wasn't Drury. He was not the architect, but the team was good. They made the conference finals in 22. They were a very good team in 23. They fired Gerard Gallant. They win 55 games in 24. Like they are humming. They are considered a bona fide contender. The team was good. And like the St. Louis Blues weren't exactly killing it. Now they're looking to get out of Pavel Buchnevich's contract. So this is way worse. It's immeasurably worse. Yes.
All right, so there goes that question, pretty much. Um, this next question comes from our friend Tyler, Mr. Rangers recap himself, and he says, so now that Gavin McKenna is potentially going to face jail time, who are we selecting with our draft pick? So now, just as for context, if you don't know, Gavin McKenna, over the last month and a half, it just came out today. He was charged with assault, harassment, felony, actually,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the four charges he's facing over an altercation and dispute that happened outside of a restaurant in Pennsylvania. Don't know the specifics too much in terms of what happened, but it's bad enough where he ended up potentially breaking somebody's jaw, and he is being, facing some jail time. So with that being said, the one time or the next time that the Rangers potentially have an opportunity to potentially get a good player in McKenna, he could potentially end up becoming a criminal. So who would the Rangers pick? I honestly, I haven't really looked too much into it just yet. I have no idea who they could pick. I know there's a couple other players where if I hear their names, I think they'll be decent fits. I know Hope and Dave have mentioned some players in the chat, but it hasn't really stuck to me yet because I'm not in draft mode just yet. I'm still in regular season mode to a degree. But yeah, I should start taking a look at that. But honestly, Tyler, I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, so the only other name, and I've started to read a little bit of draft stuff. Obviously, Ivar Stenberg he's a
Yeah, that's
Swedish
the
kid.
name. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, McKenna has had an interesting year at Penn State. Let's put the felony assault charge aside, just from a hockey perspective. Sorry, I'm chuckling as I say that. His stock has not exactly risen. I don't think it's fair to say it's like fallen that much, but it seems like Stenberg, who had like an insane World Juniors, over the Christmas period, sort of made a real leap to the point where there's a legitimate like number one, number two debate between the two of them. Um, Sounds like it's not dissimilar to the Hughes Kako thing. Um, Now, I will say that like that was probably less of a actual debate because Hughes was a center and Kako was a winger. In this
Mhm.
case, both McKenna and Stenberg are wingers. So look, I would just say, look, if the Rangers are fortunate enough to pick first, you go with Stenberg. There seems to be a player that's close to McKenna's level there.
Right.
So you do that. So we'll
With
see
less
how it nets out.
too.
Look, I think there is a good chance the Rangers are picking in the top four, three or four. I don't know about one or two, but um, Stenberg would be the guy. And yet, look, I mean, this McKenna thing sounds serious. There's video. It's a very well documented case. It had a lot of witnesses. I haven't read a lot of it either, JL, but sounds ugly and not, will certainly affect the draft process for him, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. And you know, being that I've become a bit of a pessimist lately with the Rangers, it wouldn't entirely shock me if Chris Drury ends up making the pick of Gavin McKenna, even with all this, because it just kind of seems to me that NHL GMs just tend to ignore these things, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
players committing fouls. And, I could understand to a degree that he's 18 and he's a bit of a hothead, he made a mistake. But also at the same time, if you're going to potentially be an NHL prospect or a high NHL prospect, mind you, that you have to conduct yourself a bit better out on the ice. But that's another story for another day. I wouldn't be surprised if in the situation the Rangers end up putting themselves in with a high draft pick and McKenna's there. I know they're going to do it, but that's another conversation for another day. Okay. This next question comes from PickleRick1138 at bsky.social. And they say, does the Mafia follow the Rangers and are they upset enough to do something about it? And Drury and Dolan are in the Epstein files.
I mean, yeah, listen, it's dark, man. This is where people's heads go. I mean, I said that it seems very quaint, but Dave was kicking around a Tampa Bay package that I thought would have been terrible. And in hindsight, that package looks great. I wish they were getting Gage Gonzalez and Oliver Bjorkstrand's contract and a first round pick. That would have been great. I clearly that shows where my head was at. But no, the anger of this fan base is fully justified. This team had a very good thing going for many years. And they even, again, with their last rebuild, if you want to get in the weeds and argue the merits of accelerating it by signing Artemi Panarin, trading for Jacob Trouba, et cetera, they've been a mostly good hockey team for a better part of the last 20 years. There's been a lot of playoff games at Madison Square Garden. There's been a lot of great stuff that's happened. Look, no cup, and that's a fair criticism, but I think a lot of teams would sign up to be in the conference finals 6 times or 5 times in 12 years. And it has been royally dismantled in unbelievably dramatic fashion by Chris Drury, and people are right to be upset about that. So, yeah.
All right, now we're going to go onto the website. Thank you to everyone who contributed questions onto the social media, onto Blue Sky. We really do appreciate it. We don't get as much traction on Twitter anymore, but we hope that we continue to get some on Blue Sky moving forward. All right, let me just pull this up real quick. So this first question on the site comes from NYC Crash, and they ask 3 and 1. So I'll just name them all out here. Do you think the return is fair for Panarin? Do you think we will get a better return if we move Vincent Trocheck? And who else will be on the way out this year?
Obviously no. On number 1, I do think that Trocheck offers an opportunity to get an actual NHL body or two, and maybe a first round pick, just because of the positional value. The contract is extremely reasonable for what is it, 3 more seasons, or 2 more seasons, but whatever it is, it's $5.5 million, which is nothing with the cap going up. His perceived value around the league is very, very high. I mean, every GM loves Vincent Trocheck, rightfully so. The guy is an excellent hockey player, and it would certainly behoove the Rangers to see what the market can bring back for him. People brought up this comparison, so it's not an original thought, but this is very similar to what the Rangers had with Derek Brassard, and Derek Brassard did not have the league-wide reputation that Vincent Trocheck has. He is just looked at as more of a leadership, gritty, two-way type that can also score any place center. Obviously, Brassard did too, and Brassard turned into Mika Zibanejad, and that is really the type of deal the Rangers need to pull. Again, until that deal happens, I'm going to be pretty steadfast in my belief that this thing's not going to turn around anytime soon. Now, Vincent Trocheck nets you a young potential top 6 center, the way Mika Zibanejad was, and a first round pick, and maybe another NHL body that you could throw in there and maybe kind of bring a little bit of new juice and energy to the team. Then you got me back in. That's how sports work, right? But so yes, it is possible Trocheck brings back more. And then what was the last part?
The last one is who else will be on the way out this year?
Oh, I mean, I think it's the usual names we've mentioned, right? Potentially Lafreniere, Braden Schneider. If someone's interested in Sam Carrick, he's a very dependable 4th line center. Probably doesn't go much beyond that, but they're apparently listening on everybody, as they should.
Yeah, I guess just in terms of just the Trocheck return, like you said, until that sort of trade happens, I'm just kind of weary on the handling of that asset and who's going to replace Trocheck. I don't think whatever potential deal Chris Drury is going to do, that whatever comes back is going to end up replacing what Vincent Trocheck could do. So honestly, at this point, if it's going to be a retool, like they say, you might as well just keep him at least for another season or two and see what you can get. I'm having trouble in having confidence on what potentially can come back, or Chris Drury's handling of assets, because I was just shocked at how little they got today
Yeah.
for Panarin. So, and I guess who else is on the way out? It's probably, you can say Schneider, you can say Lafreniere. Lafreniere a little bit less so. Schneider probably because, he doesn't exactly fit the bill of a Drury player anymore. Um, it's kind of crazy to say that because they coveted him for so much that they refused to put him in any sort of deal for any other player. But all right, this next question comes from Pete the Greek 33. Why can't Dolan dump Drury? Does he have an Epstein file on him? Look, this guy has destroyed all the prospects and morale with his treatment of the team. You don't say you're trading the captain and wait weeks. The captain played with a broken bone in his foot. Just horrific management really reflects on Dolan. It's his organization. He can make the call. It would be nice if one game every or even half wouldn't show up. They should give the tickets to the homeless and criminals on the streets. That is the type of client Dolan deserves. The garbage for garbage he gives us. So there's that question. I don't know if he's got any Epstein connections, but I mean, I do understand the frustration. Why can't Drury dump? Why can't Dolan dump Drury? I don't know.
He can. I think I think sometimes this stuff also, it's helpful to remember that if you fire someone, then you have to do a lot of work because you have to go through a hiring process. And some of these people are lazy. Some of these people want to do other things like uh, hang out with their musician friends and like build more spheres around the world. Um, and it sounds silly, but like, JL, I was having this conversation with my brother actually about the Jets, who are another absolute dumpster
Oh,
fire of an
yeah.
organization.
Well,
And we were basically saying like part of their issue is that like they have a lot of people in their football operations personnel department that have been there for like 15 years. And you're thinking to yourself, like, the team's been awful for 15 years. Why haven't they fired these people? And I think like some of it is probably like they don't want to spend the money because like salaries have gone up and they'd have to spend a lot of money to replace like hordes of people who do scouting and analytics and all that stuff. But it's also just laziness. It's like, wow, that's a lot of admin. That's a lot of emails. That's a lot of Zoom calls. That's a lot of interviews. Like, look, it's easier for James Dolan to buy what Chris Drury is selling him, for Chris Drury to basically say, hey, look, you fired JD and Jeff Gorton because you thought the team was supposed to be better. And 2 years later, we were in the conference finals. Like, I did my job. 2 years after that, we were in the conference finals again. And if we get a bounce, we're up 3-1, with a chance we're a game away from playing for the Stanley Cup. Like, okay, fine. It hasn't gone great the last 2 years, but don't kick me to don't kick me to the curb now. Give me a chance to fix this because guys get old. It's sports. And Dolan, for better or worse, has a long leash. And I've used this, I've reminded people of this many times. Isaiah Thomas had his job
yeah.
forever, and the Knicks were awful. The Knicks were a laughingstock, and they're the team that Dolan supposedly cares about more. They're certainly the team that generates more press, both in New York and nationally. He could certainly fire him if he wants. I don't think he wants to.
Yeah, and also, you just made a whole public declaration on radio,
Yeah.
basically saying that he believes in Chris Drury, and also
Yep.
Mike Sullivan too is also a huge factor here, and how much influence Sullivan has on Chris Drury, because now that's finally his guy. And
100%.
I guess, one silver lining I have within all of this, and I repeated this on the podcast before, it's the fact that I think Mike Sullivan may just be, maybe on a small scale, just might be able to potentially give this team the jolt that it needs, because again, he is a two-time Stanley Cup winning coach. He knows what it takes. He knows what types of players he needs for that. Um, he's kind of a big advisor with Chris Drury, and he's a crucial part of the process right now. So I think that you know Chris Drury taking notes from Mike Sullivan is a good thing, and could potentially be one of the few silver linings that keeps this from really sort of turning into Dark Ages 2.0, because now everyone has to be in lockstep on what they want and what type of talent is out there, and whether or not they can pull off a trade, swing something, or whatever. That's the only thing that I'm hoping. Like you said, Dolan doesn't fire anybody. You know,
Yeah.
it takes a
No,
lot. It takes a lot for Dolan to really, I think though, if it ends up getting to the point where the Rangers are still losing and getting embarrassed, I think he has no choice but to make a decision. But for right now, at least for the next 2 seasons, Drury's going to be here. You know,
yeah. And I
and
think the point about Sullivan is a good one. And I think if you look, you can always get a new coach. And I think there's, definitely good arguments on both sides about the sort of influence and impact of coaches in the NHL. But if you fire Drury, you're losing Sullivan. And that's not the end of the world. I understand that. But um I think I agree with you, JL, that he is one of the potential fixers of this. And hopefully he can get more out of a roster that um look next year and when and we'll talk about next year when the time is right, when it starts taking shape. But like the Rangers are gonna have to become much more of a hardworking team that where the they're greater than the sum of their parts is the term, right?
Mhm.
They've gotten by on pure talent for a lot of years, and that is not going to be the case for the foreseeable future. So that's coaching, that's buy-in, that's structure, that's motivation, that's like the team busts their ass every night, which this Ranger team clearly does not. So anyway, yeah, not to go on too big of a tangent there, but I agree. Like Sullivan's has a role to play here, and that is, I think, helping keep Chris Drury in place.
Right. All right, got a couple more questions on the site. This one comes from Midline Shift, and they ask, would it have been better to re-sign Panarin to a similar extension that LA gave him than get such a meager return in trade? I think we touched on that already, but yeah.
Totally, yeah, and look, they may have been able to do that if they didn't release the letter. That's where this all comes back to for me. No matter how the talks went in over the summer and in the fall, how whenever they were trying to work out an extension, and it didn't seem like they got very far. But the second you broadcasted to the world that you were trading everybody, and you went to his agent and said, "We're trading you. We're not offering you extension. Like, don't even bother with talks." That took any of those possibilities off the table, and it took away your leverage because you could not return to the table at that point. So, um, a huge fail by Chris Drury, because certainly, like, it's a no brainer. Of course, they should. If the option is trade him for a third round pick and Liam Greentree, or resign him for 2 years at $11 million a year, it's a very easy choice.
Right. I concur. I already said my piece on that.
Yep.
So this next question comes from G8 Lafreniere, and they ask, how do you feel about the return that you were suggesting just a day or two ago? This is directed to Dave. That Drury could get a first round pick, Cole Hudson, and Protas. I think it's Ilya Protas from
Mm-hmm.
Washington's little brother. And then it goes, LMAO, really, Dave? And then they say, this is where I can't rip you apart because I truly think you believe what you wrote to be an actual return. So there must be some integrity in you. But if I see a puff piece of how Panarin held all the cards tomorrow on this site, I will be very disappointed. Um, I think that's what we were all shooting for in terms of potentially, you know, potentially looking for a return. And I think honestly, I think that would have been reasonable if the Rangers had played their cards right, because at least in Washington's term, then again, they were limited to who they could deal with, but if they didn't put themselves in that corner and Washington was a serious suitor, then I think that Cole Hudson, Ilya Protas, and a first would have been by far a great return. Um, but I think on what Dave was saying, I think that would have been fair if the Rangers hadn't painted themselves in a corner.
Yeah, and also look to come to Dave's defense here. Um, whenever we discuss trades, and Dave has a very good handle on sort of the NHL trade market, he's basically building his proposed trades based off of recent comparable trades. And guys like Artemi Panarin on the open market, right? Meaning very good slash elite players who are in the last year of their deal with no move clauses. That's important here because, and that is the point, right? And look, I don't think there's going to be any puff pieces on Blue Seat blogs or many other places about, well, they really, Panarin held all the. Yeah, I understand what the questioner is saying here. Um, all you can do is look at the NHL landscape of over the last few years and make your best guess as to what's available, uh, and what the your trade chip might bring back to you. So again, like just use the Brock Nelson example. Brock Nelson was one of the Islanders' best players, basically their Chris Kreider, right, on an expiring deal with a no move clause, and he got Cal Ritchie in a first.
Mm-hmm.
And the Rangers did not get the equivalent of Cal Ritchie in a first. So that's where Dave's like Cole Hudson, Ilya Protas, first round pick, like that's where that comes from, is looking at that trade, the Giroux trades, to some extent the Brad Marchand trade, and you try and make your best guess, right? So again, Dave knows what he's talking about. And he is, I'm not to speak for him, I'm sure he'll get to say his piece maybe on next week's show. He is just as angry about this as everybody at Chris Drury.
Oh yeah.
And I look forward to his rants next week.
Oh yeah. All right. Well,
Hello, hello.
all right. So as you can tell, we're all we're all still pretty frustrated just from today. It just I could just tell from just reading a lot of these comments. There's just a lot of like this sort of exasperation on just everybody. And I was just I was going through Twitter again before we recorded just to kind of get a feeling again because I was just such in awe of how exasperated everyone was. But it's just really been how do we do this?
Yeah.
Honestly, how do we do this? I genuinely don't know. But all right, so we're going back to the questions again. Had a little bit of an audio hiccup there, but this next question comes from long time one time, and long time one time asks, "Why do we put ourselves through this crap every year after year?" And then in bold it says, "Why?"
Yeah, I know. We get this question every week. It's literally every single week. Someone says, "Why do we do this?" I mean, look, the team sucks. I give a different answer every week. I know Dave does too. I don't know. You could stop watching it any time. That's what I'll say. Most of us know we actually can't do that. And but you can. Certainly this season, like you're under no obligation to watch this shell of a team play out the string. Check back in June and see how it looks. I don't know what to tell
Right.
you. It sucks, but you know what? Like, I know most of us are going to keep watching and we're going to look for the positives, whether it's Gabe Perreault, whether it's Adam Fox coming back and Igor coming back and the Rangers looking a little bit more like a real NHL team.
Mm-hmm.
Um, maybe the Vincent Trocheck trade surprises us. Maybe the Rangers, turn Braden Schneider into something. Maybe some other guys from Hartford come up and surprise us because that those things do happen. And the only way you find out is if you keep watching and you keep listening to the podcast and you keep reading the blog and interacting on social. So it sucks today, but we hope it gets better.
Right. Nope. I agree. I mean, you know, every season presents a different opportunity, and the only thing we can do is hope. And this is one thing I learned, just at least for myself. I know everybody has different experiences, but the way I'm able to deal with it is, when you watch the Mets for so long, especially under the Wilpon ownership, it just kind of gets to a point where you just kind of have to take it year by year if, you don't have sort of a consistent sort of management, ideology following the team. But, you know, just kind of have to just kind of stick around, you know. This next question comes from Nikki70, and Nikki70 asks, with the 8 million plus added to the cap with Panarin and Susi gone, what do you think Drury does next? I would assume he'd take on some deadwood from playoff teams for draft picks, or do you think he has plans to add a significant player to this roster? And do you think that could have been a reason for Drury completing this trade before the break rather than waiting? That's actually a good question.
I mean, that would be great. And I think one of the things that we are struggling to do is to discern what the plan is here. So, look, this has been something that again we've talked about during the previous rebuilds, right? I remember having these conversations with Dave about like, can you weaponize your cap space? And can you, step in as a third team, right? During the trade deadline and retain some salary for someone so that which gets you a draft pick so that they can make a deal, right? And two contenders or a contender and a seller can match up on a trade that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to. I saw Montreal is trying to get off of Patrick Laine's contract, and they're willing to maybe attach an asset to it. Like, why not do that? And you know what? That might even serve the dual purpose of mending fences with Jeff Gorton, because Montreal might be a team you want to deal with. They're a team with a lot of young assets that's going to start trying to build themselves a new contender. They might be willing to expend a young player or two. Let's not forget that one of the key trades in Ranger history was Scott Gomez for Ryan McDonough, and that was with the Montreal Canadiens. So, I'm not saying that's going to happen again. And I think, Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes are smarter than whoever the hell was running the Canadiens back then. But the point is, those are the types of opportunities you have to look for. And I think what's frustrating for me is that this trade totally misses the mark, right? It neither makes you better today, but it also doesn't set you up well for the future. It's just a total dart throw across the board for an elite player who was a point per game guy in the league. He's the fifth highest scorer in the league over the last 10 years. So it's a tough one to swallow. Now, if the additional cap space is weaponized, if the Rangers are willing to get creative as we approach the deadline, then maybe we can start seeing what the overall plan is, and we can give Drury a little bit more slack. But yeah, I mean, it is a good question. And it sounds like the person who asked that question is thinking more creatively than Chris Drury at the moment.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are actually thinking more creatively than Chris Drury right now. So I give Nikki70 credit for that. I have to see what else they do. What Chris Drury did last year, at least in terms of shedding the assets, was potentially trying to find players that could potentially be fits for this year's roster. I think he had an idea, like I mentioned before, that he was going to bring Mike Sullivan aboard. So he wanted to have certain players that could potentially fit if they were going to end up being a playoff contender. And that's what they said. Look, say what you want about Carson Soucy, he fits the mold, and he didn't really play terrible here. He wasn't
He didn't. Dave hated him. I never got the hate. He was
I
fine.
never understood the hate either. Carson Soucy wasn't terrible here. I could name a bunch more defensemen who are worse, including some players that are on the roster right now that are a bit overhyped. I really thought that Soucy was better than Braden Schneider in many respects. He held his own. So you see why they made those moves that they did last year to get Vakanainen, to get, Borgen, who is probably playing hurt right now, because you don't just go from being one of the better defensemen on the team to just all of a sudden being crap after missing a couple of days. A lot of these guys are still playing hurt, and that's not just a Ranger thing, that's a league-wide thing. So I want to see what happens after the break. I'm curious as to what Chris Drury is going to do. I don't have much confidence, but that being said, I'm still curious because, there has to be some idea on what they want to do. I mean, you can't just not try to put a good team together. I mean, these guys have been in hockey for 20 something odd years. You can't just stay, oh yeah, I'm just going to do this and be fine with it. No, they have to have somewhat of an idea on what they're going to do. James Dolan's not paying this guy millions of dollars just for him to sit on his hands. Because if that's the case, then that's just malpractice. He may not be the best, but Chris Drury has to have some sort of idea. I don't know what it is yet. So I want to be able to see at least what could potentially come out. But at the same time, there have been many instances where Drury's missed the mark. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the
No,
last
it.
question, by the
Yeah.
way. Just
Okay. Yeah. No. I mean, no. You put that really well. And look, I agree with you. At a certain point, you do have to remember that these guys are professionals, and they are sitting in meetings, and they are. I'm sure there's a bunch of names on the whiteboard, and there's active conversations with other GMs. Now, obviously, the Olympics are sort of throwing a wrench into whatever flow they might have gotten into and whatever subsequent conversations they might have had. But look, ultimately, I, jury's going to make or break. I truly do believe that like he makes or breaks his career as an NHL executive with the next, like, let's call it year. I think the Rangers have a year to show that they are capable of turning the roster over, that they're capable of importing young, real talent. And again, not trying to like totally discount Liam Greentree, but like I don't count him in that. Like he screams like typical middling Ranger prospect. Just his profile, the fact that he hasn't scored very much in junior the last year or so, um, the lack of compete, at times, the sub elite skating when the team is desperate for speed, like all these things. He just seems like a guy that's going to go to Hartford and have like 8 points in 35 games. Like that's what it feels like to me. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope he turns out to be a really good NHL player and that we're laughing about this in a couple of years. But he has a year to prove that it's not just going to be more of the same, that we're just not on an endless hamster wheel of like mediocrity and like hoping that your elite guys and your goaltender drag you to the 8th seed to save your job, because that's another sort of like possibility here that would be pretty disastrous. And I don't mean this year. I mean that for next year. But
right.
no, look, this is a lot of work needs to be done for this team to get back to respectability. And I don't know that Chris Drury will ever earn the trust of this fan base back. I'll say that too. Like, even if he does make a series of decent moves, and if you look at the roster next year, you're like, okay, they're actually like, they look okay and they're playing hard and they might be kind
Yes,
of a spunky, like middle. I still think the fan base, I think they're going to hate him forever. Very much the way they hated Glenn Sather forever. And Sather earned it. And I think Drury's earned it. So I'll stop there. Do you have any final thoughts?
Just a quick point on Greentree before I give my final thoughts. Just to add to that, he did have a wrist issue, so
Okay.
that's probably partly why he was starting off slow. Um, I I look at the type of guys that they're bringing in. Malcolm Spence, I think will be a player that will make an impact on this team.
That might be, yeah, he's had a good freshman year in college. Yes. That looks
Yeah,
like a decent draft pick.
Malcolm Spence, C.J. Emery, who's also coming back from an injury, and Drew Fortescue, I think, are some guys who I think will end up making impact. A lot of people tend to forget about Fortescue. Um, so there's that. You mix in Gabe Perreault, and then you got like an Adam Sikora, who I think will probably be here at some point. The bones on this team are not as bad as I think some people are putting it out to be, and I think uh, this is going to be the year, like you said, where they're going to have to look for that high end skill. Final thoughts, I guess, just with like the Panarin trade and just everything overall. You know, um, I'm very underwhelmed, but in order for this to really hit for me, I guess an emotional thing, I'm upset because you know there you could have just kept them, but it happened. Can't change anything now, and you just kind of have to see what ends up happening at this point because they're gonna get a high draft pick, unless the NHL decides to quote unquote rig it against us, as we all tend to feel that way. But they're gonna get a high draft pick, whether it's gonna have to be between at least 1 to 4,
Yeah.
and I think that you can't mess this up. You're gonna get a decent player top 4. And hopefully, Stenberg, or if I'm apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, you know, he'll be the guy, or whoever else is top 4. Um, but this is the opportunity for them to get a guy who can fit whatever speed aspect they're looking for. Unless they decide to completely whiff on a pick, remains to be seen. Um, the rest of the team, you know, I don't think that it's that dire, honestly. If all the cards play right, though, I think with JT Miller potentially coming back healthy, and I don't think they're going to trade Trocheck, so he'll be here, next year. There is a lot to build with this team, They just need the scoring. And they can find that somewhere, whether it's either building up on secondary or getting a guy like Jason Robertson and getting like a secondary scorer to round out with Perot. But we clearly see Zibanejad is performing. A healthy JT Miller should be okay. Perot's been great with those two. And then you basically have some pretty decent depth. Get another defenseman or two, and I think they'll be fine. They're probably not going to win a cup, but it's not going to be the worst. That's if everything plays out properly. It kind of seems to me that when it can go wrong, it will go wrong here. But I still have some optimism and faith. My faith has been shaken a little bit, but I still have some optimism of this team being a competitive team, a decent team. Not a cup winning team, but a team that can definitely compete for like a late wild card spot or something like that. I see it. There's still talent on this team, but this Panarin trade just absolutely sucks.
Yeah, and to your point, like I do think that there needs to be, there just need to be more needs to be done, even if you are keeping Trocheck, which I don't. They certainly could. I don't think that would be smart because I think he has the highest value. And there's more opportunity there because he only has a 12-team no trade list. But, regardless of that, like a lot needs to be done, and not just on like the player acquisition and roster building front, but like just pure development. I mean, you mentioned Adam Sikora, like that guy's been in the minors for 4 years now. Gabe Perreault's got to become a real point producer. Like he's had some nice moments. He looks more comfortable, but like if he tops out at a 40, 45 point guy, like that's not going to be good enough. And so he's got to pop. Noah Laba's got to make a step, and he's got to stay healthy because he keeps getting hurt. They still have to get much more mobile on defense. They have to add puck movers. They have to add pure foot speed too. That there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I understand what you're saying. That sort of like the key guys, the sort of like older core they have in place. Like, sure, you could build a decent NHL team around that, but there's a lot of building still to be done. So, no, look, I agree with you. Ultimately, this is a tough day for Ranger fans. It's sad to lose a player like Panarin. It is infuriating that the return that they got. All the emotions that folks are feeling are legitimate. And we will, we'll continue to cover it because I think Panarin's just the first domino to fall. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.